Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I'm taking this approach with today's review just because I feel like it. Today, I am discussing the 2019 anime of Ultraman, which recently premiered on Netflix. Now, this is not an actual original Netflix series, it is in fact based on a manga. And I've read the first 2 volumes of that manga, so I have some familiarity with it. I have only read the first 2 volumes, though, because, well, it just didn't grab me when I first picked these up. At first I thought, oh cool, Ultraman manga, and it's in fact a sequel to the original 1966 to 1967 series that started it all. So, bit of a franchise reboot, but doesn't really matter. Sounded like a good idea. I picked these 2 volumes up, I read them, and they just didn't grab me. Something about it wasn't clicking with me. And so I just sort of set them aside. I didn't really revisit the series. Then I learned that this anime was coming along, adapting this series. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I mean, sure, I wasn't really into it when it was a manga, but maybe a change in format will actually improve things. Sometimes that can happen. Sometimes adapting the source material can lead to some improvements. You trim the fat, or you see something that's much better in motion than it is in still images or described in written prose. Any number of things can happen. It's rare, but it can happen. So I just thought, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. Now, to answer the question I know some of you are going to ask, yes, I think the Ultraman anime is better than the Godzilla anime. Though that's not necessarily the same as saying it's good. I mean, you can say that the Son of Sam is a better person than the Zodiac Killer, but at the end of the day, they're still murderers and they should probably not be considered role models. So, I'm not gonna base this entirely, of course, on how it fares compared to the Godzilla anime trilogy. I'm basing this entirely on how it functions as its own thing. I just wanted to get that question out of the way. So like I said, even though I wasn't all that thrilled with what I read of the manga, I was willing to give the anime a shot to change my mind. And, well, for the first 6 episodes, I was on the fence. Because it wasn't necessarily bad, but it also wasn't really Ultraman. Like, superheroes, because Ultraman is essentially a superhero, they have their own distinct identities. You can say certain things about them and say, yes, that's keeping in tone or in the spirit of this particular character. Ultraman is no different. And something about the series, which carried over from the manga, it just didn't feel like Ultraman. What it felt like was a Marvel series. Like, very blatantly. If I were to summarize the plot of this series in the simplest of terms, it would be S.H.I.E.L.D. gives Peter Parker the Iron Man suit. That's really the simplest way I can put it. You have the secret organization, you have the teenage protagonist who's struggling with his powers and his responsibilities thereof, and you have him in a suit of armor with a little light right in the center. I mean, yes, I know that's part of Ultraman, but look at these suits of armor. Does that look like a traditional Ultraman armor? Because I'm pretty sure I saw those during the finale of Iron Man 3. So, that was something that did bother me early on, and it's part of what drove me away from the manga, because it didn't have the Ultraman identity, it had the Marvel identity. Which, that's not to say the Marvel identity is bad, but they're 2 very different things. Ultraman has his own identity. Ultraman is a trendsetter in Japan, and seeing him basically trying to follow a different trend set by a completely different franchise, I don't know, it just wasn't working for me. And also there was the animation. The animation of this series was inconsistent. First of all, the art style for the characters made them look like they were made of plastic. It's not a good style. It's again 3D CGI animation, which seems to be dominating more and more of these Netflix original anime series. And it just doesn't look right just in terms of the art style. I guess you could say it matches what's in the manga, just in 3 dimensions, but it looks far better when the characters' faces are covered, when you're not seeing actual organic beings. With the mechanical suits, it's okay, but with the actual human faces and even the alien faces, it looks unnatural, and I never got used to it. And then, of course, there's the inconsistent frame rate. That was also very distracting. I've read in some places that the series was actually done with motion capture, which I can believe that. It looks like it was done with mocap a lot of the time. But for some reason, the frame rate keeps changing. A lot of the times it'll be moving really smoothly, like natural human motion, then suddenly the frame rate will dip, and it'll just be for a few seconds it does that, and then go back to smooth stuff. Or sometimes it's the inverse. It'll be the lower frame rate where the movement is kind of jerky and kind of distracting when you're looking at something that has been motion captured. Then there'll be a quick shot of something moving very smoothly, and then back to the low frame rate. To better explain why this is bothering me, let me compare it to something that took a similar approach but did it much better. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. A large chunk of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is a 3D CGI animated film, has a low frame rate. And there are 2 reasons why it has a low frame rate for most of its runtime. Part of that was a practical choice, because the film was very complex to animate, and dropping the frame rate for most of it made it just that much easier to do. They probably could have done it all at one consistent frame rate, but it would have taken much, much longer. But the other reason was a creative choice, because they wanted the film to look like a comic book page come to life. It's a very stylized looking film, and they deliberately styled it to look like a page from a comic book. And so having that lower frame rate added to that illusion. But there are certain points in Spider-Verse where the frame rate jumps up drastically. It's always, however, strategically used. It's for a shot where it would be really dynamic to have quicker, more fluid motion. Like the shot during the forest chase of Doc Ock charging at the camera, or pick any shot from the grand finale. So that's an example of how inconsistent frame rate can actually work. When you place the different kind of frame rate in a specific place to contrast with the other stuff, it looks good. And Spider-Verse definitely is a good-looking film. But with Ultraman, I paid attention, I tried finding a pattern, and I could not find any. The frame rates just change at random. And I know some people might say that sounds like nitpicking, but I think talking about the animation of an animated series is kind of an important detail, so that was kind of bothering me. At the same time, though, there were things that I liked, or things that I thought would be better developed later on in the series. For example, even though I said these suits look like Iron Man suits, they don't look bad. It's an interesting way to update the Ultraman look. There were also little elements throughout, like how it connects back to the original Ultraman series. For example, it's not that big of a spoiler because it's revealed pretty quickly. We learn that the old members of the Science Patrol always knew that Hayata was Ultraman. I mean, it actually kind of makes sense that they would figure it out. But, you know, they never said anything. That's an interesting idea. I would have liked to see that better explored. Or the idea that some of the aliens from the past have become allies out of necessity in the present. That's an idea that could be worth exploring. So, there was a lot going on in this series that just had me sitting on the fence. I didn't really know what to think for roughly the first half of it, and I was waiting for something to come along to just tip me to one side or the other. Something needed to happen to make me decide whether or not I thought the show was good or bad. And I wish I could say what happened made me think the show was good, but that would be lying. Episodes 7 and 8 came along, and they tell one continuous story between them. That's where the show fell apart for me. It started with the character of Rena Sayama, the only female character of any significance in the series, at least in these 13 episodes. What is it with Netflix anime and their problematic portrayals of female characters? Anyway, for the first half of the series, she has a very particular character trait. She is an up-and-coming teenage pop idol, and she's also a big fan of Ultraman, which the new Ultraman, Shinjiro Hayata, who is the original Hayata's son and inherited his Ultraman powers, it's a bit of a retcon from the original series, but just go with it, he picks up on that, and in typical awkward teenage fashion, he wants to try approaching her and getting to know her and maybe letting on that he's Ultraman, but also doesn't really want to. You know the way it is if you've read any Spider-Man comic. But in episode 7, something changes, and it changes completely out of the blue. Rena's character suddenly does a complete 180, and for this 2-episode segment, hates Ultraman. Now, there is a reason given as to why Rena hates Ultraman. A reason that probably screws up the timeline, but I don't really want to get into that particular detail right now, because it's secondary to the big issue. The big issue is that none of it is foreshadowed. There's no build-up to it. Or, scratch that, there is some build-up, but none of it applies to Rena. It applies to her father, the police officer who has a problem with a masked vigilante running around in the city because, like I said, we're going for a Marvel story here, and that's a staple of Marvel Comics. So, all of that build-up applied to him. He clearly had a deeper reason to not like Ultraman that we were getting hints of. And then all of a sudden, for episodes 7 and 8, her personality, Rena's personality, switches out with her father's. She suddenly has all of his hatred solely for the purpose of creating friction between her and Shinjiro. That's it. And as soon as episode 8 is over and this particular plot arc concludes, Rena resets to who she was at the beginning. It's a completely artificial turn for the character that came out of nowhere. And speaking of coming out of nowhere, as if that weren't bad enough, episode 8 concludes this particular arc with a twist that is just so convoluted and requires you to accept that things we had never seen before and gotten very few hints of were somehow right in front of us the whole time. Those 2 episodes were just a mess, and they are what finally pushed me over to the side of realizing that this show was not winning me over. It was bad. And the only reason I finished it was so I could have a fully informed opinion. So people couldn't tell me, oh, that was just a fluke. After that, it gets better. Nope, it didn't. Especially considering that the first opponent Shinjiro faces as Ultraman, the character of Bemular, who we still don't know the origins of at the end of this series, suddenly becomes a good guy without any real build-up to that either. It's just suddenly he's not evil anymore. He started out being completely evil, but now maybe he's not. Or maybe he is and he's just got an agenda. I don't really know. It seems as if they were kind of making some of this up as they went along. And if that's any reflection of what happens in the manga itself, then I'm glad I didn't waste any more money buying volumes after the second one. Now, just to keep you guys from getting the wrong idea, I'm not about to sit here and try convincing you that the reason this series fails is because the original Ultraman is some kind of untouchable masterpiece. Because if I'm being honest, it's not a masterpiece. It's very rough around the edges. Very low budget when it came to the special effects. Scripts didn't always make much sense. Occasionally odd cinematography choices. Then there was that infamous English dub. So, the original Ultraman isn't perfect. But do you know what won people over with this series? What won people over was the fact that it was unique, for the time at least it was unique, and it was sincere. It had heart to it. As I said earlier, Ultraman has always had its own identity. Yes, in the early days it did take some influence from Godzilla, but it wasn't long before Godzilla was being influenced by Ultraman. Where do you think Jaguar came from? And even with all of its imperfections and its flaws, it never felt insincere. It was clear from every shot in the series that Eiji Tsuburaya was making this because he loved doing this. He believed in this. He knew this was exactly what he wanted to do. And even if he didn't have the same resources he had in the movies, he was going to do the best he could with what he had. And that shone through in every frame. That was a clear sign that this was more than just a simple little show that was thrown together for the heck of it. This was something different. And as a result of this combination of sincerity and identity, Ultraman became one of the biggest pieces of Japanese pop culture. He's the hero by which all other superheroes in Japan are judged. He wasn't the first necessarily, but he is still the gold standard. And that just doesn't seem to be the case with this new version. It clearly doesn't have its own identity, like I've said. It's trying to be a Marvel series. Even the last shot of the last episode feels like it could have been taken out of any random Marvel film. And unfortunately, that does hurt it. And it also doesn't feel like it was made with the same level of sincerity as the original. The original manga, the guys who made that, they claim to be huge Ultraman fans, and there are so many references in there that I believe they are, but that just doesn't seem to have translated into the work itself. The anime especially feels very cold and very calculated in ways, not like it was designed because the people making it love the material, but because Ultraman is popular, so let's just make one of those and see how it goes. I mean, I wish I could tell you differently. I wanted to understand. I really did. But at the end of the day, it just didn't translate. I have seen a lot of people say they like this series. I have also noted that a lot of those people admit they're not familiar with the Ultraman series prior to it. I think that's pretty telling. But I don't know. I'm someone who is familiar with the Ultra series prior to this anime. I personally thought it was a huge step down. Maybe not necessarily in terms of quality. The series definitely looks much slicker than the original series ever did. But where's the heart? Combine that with how I felt like it was leaning too heavily on superhero and anime cliches without really doing anything new with any of them. And I just don't think this series is very good. It's proven to be really popular in Japan. From the moment the manga came out, you were automatically getting like those high-end SH Monster Arts figures of this new Ultraman. But I can't help but feel that's simply because it is Ultraman. And Ultraman is insanely popular. Long term, I don't really know how this series is going to measure up. But I personally just don't think it was worth it. I wish I could tell you differently, but I can't. The Ultraman anime was a misfire. At least in my opinion it is. I'm sure a lot of you feel differently, and if you do, feel free to express why in the comments section below. I can't say that you'll convince me otherwise, but, well, the invitation is still open. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.